Welcome to Codex History of Video Games. My name is Tyler Osby.
And I'm Mike Coletta.
And today, we're talking chapters 44 through 51 in Console Wars by Blake J. Harris. This is a great book. It's we're doing our book club series here. And we don't want this podcast to be a substitute for reading the book, because the book is very good and is written in a really cool way that you won't get from us. But if you are reading the book and you want to talk to somebody about it or listen to us talk about it, that's what we're going to do today. Chapters 44 through 51. We're almost done with this book. We got one more part after this, right?
Yeah, one more section. And that might be 2 episodes, maybe 3. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
but we're getting
it looks
close.
like it's a little more than 10 chapters in that last part. So, yeah, we're getting close to the end.
This is a pretty beefy book. I think we can all agree. It's beefier than we thought it would be when we started.
Yes, that is true. But it's really good, and I really enjoy it. And there is also, if you don't want to read the book, there is a movie. It's a documentary, same thing. It's called Console Wars. And,
which I think we should definitely cover that after this, right? Just to
yeah, we should
watch
just give it a watch. And I remember, it's like any movie. It doesn't cover everything the book does, but it's pretty cool. And it is a documentary. It's not like a dramatization, which I feel like would have been the way to make a movie about this, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's the direction I would have gone to.
Like a Pirates of Silicon Valley kind of thing. Have you seen Pirates of Silicon Valley?
I have not. We've talked about this, and I still need to watch it. Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
well,
let's watch that sometime.
Let's get into it. You ready? Here we go.
Yeah.
Chapter 44 is called Crazy Like a Fox, and it opens up with a rare occurrence. A Nintendo person, specifically Tony Harmon, gushing over a Sega product, which, as we all know, is not okay because they're mortal enemies at this point. And he's specifically gushing over Sega's version of Aladdin, which was made with a partnership between Virgin Interactive and Sega. And this game was amazing because the technology that they made for it was called Digicel animation. And essentially, Disney gave Virgin Interactive 250,000 cells from the actual Aladdin movie. And with this new technology, Virgin could upload those directly into their development software and make it so the game looked really, really good, like a cartoon even.
Wow.
Did you play this game as a kid? I did.
I played the Super Nintendo version, which I understand is the inferior version.
Yeah, it's still fun, though. It's just not as pretty as this one is. But what's important to note about Tony Harmon is he was Minoru Arakawa's, and that is of Nintendo of America's, #1 guy when it came to what games would do well, because he was one of the very few gamers on the Nintendo of America executive team, believe it or not. I always found that weird, that people that aren't gamers work in games, but it happens. It happens everywhere.
It happens a lot. Yep. It's not always a bad thing, but yeah, it is strange sometimes.
It's true, yeah. I mean, you need someone with business savvy and not necessarily... Gamers might just play games the whole time. It's hard.
That's true.
It's hard.
That's true.
All right, so he was there, actually, if you recall, in a previous chapter when Hiroshi Yamauchi was doing his big speech and Tony Harmon was sitting with all the legendary developers of Nintendo, and Yamauchi mentions a baseball game that Nintendo was developing. And they were all really scared because no one was developing a baseball game. And then they all kind of looked at Tony Harmon and were like, well, you do it. And so that's what he's been doing. He's trying to
making a baseball game.
Make a baseball game. And what he really wanted to do, though, Tony Harmon's passion was to make a game using iconic Nintendo characters, which is hard to do because it turns out Harmon was handcuffed by Nintendo because, this is true, he was not Japanese. Japanese people were the ones who made games with the Nintendo characters. It's a big issue. I mean, we remember talking about how hard it was for Rare in the Ultimate History of Video Games episodes to develop games for Nintendo. They had to reverse engineer the NES and then go show Nintendo that. And they were like, okay, you can make games for us. It's very, very difficult.
Yeah. And they're basically the only UK developer for the NES back in the day, at least. They were the only ones that Nintendo trusted.
Exactly. And so that's where we leave off with Harmon in the middle of this chapter. But then we jump to Bill White, who, if you recall, was Nintendo's marketing guy that Kalinske tried to poach in previous chapters in the book. Well, White sure did feel handcuffed by Nintendo's lack of innovation and really their lack to do anything about their competitors. He's just saying the same stock lines over and over again. like he would say, we were looking into CD tech because the Sega CD was going on. The NES still sells well because we believe in quality, yada, yada, yada. He would say all of these things. And then the press would ask him, because he's the marketing guy, for things that he could share, like marketing materials. And he couldn't give them any because he had to save them for Nintendo Power. It's kind of a weird spot that Bill White is in. And then on the Sega side, they are having a team meeting to determine what will be their next Christmas 1993 title, because Sonic 3, guess what? It's going to be late.
Oh, no.
The conversation quickly moves to Star Fox, which is Nintendo's like big release that's going to happen in spring. And Nintendo's kind of launching this like another Christmas, essentially. So what does Sega do? They decide to treat every month like Christmas in 1993. So they're just going to like release every single game, or excuse me, 1994. They're going to release every game almost on a monthly basis to try to like have that sort of Christmas feeling.
That's a good idea to keep people interested in having games, like a game every single month.
Yeah, totally. It's a really good idea because then they can keep the hype train rolling all year round. Like, who needs just the holidays?
Mm-hmm.
So we cut back to Tony Harmon, who's mad about the fact that he can't make a game with one of the iconic characters he loves because he is a non-Japanese person trying to make a video game for Nintendo. And so he writes a manifesto, which you don't hear often in the context of Not Something Terrible, right? The word manifesto.
That's true. Yeah.
And he has 3 big points to making a great game. And according to Harmon, those 3 big points are a big budget, coin-op experience, like the person making it has to understand the need to hook a player immediately, like old coin-op games did, and an iconic character. Now, we don't have to debate about if this is really what a person needs to make a great game on this show. I feel like this list is a little dated. I think we can all agree on that.
I think so too. I agree. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But back in the early 90s, this was probably pretty accurate because we were coming off of arcades. So needing to grab the player immediately was like sort of still understood to be the way to do it because you needed like people to be having fun as soon as they put their quarter in, right? Or they won't put another quarter in.
Exactly.
You also don't need a big budget anymore to make a great game. You did back in the day because it was so hard. Like you needed, like making a game just was like not a thing that just anybody can do. Like now there are tools for literally like just regular people to make games, but back then there weren't. And so you needed to pay people to do it. And so you needed a big budget.
Big old budgets. You needed it. Yeah. So the crazy thing about this manifesto, and to Harmon's surprise, is Minoru Arakawa actually passes this memo to Yamauchi, the head of Nintendo, who then flies Harmon to Japan to have a meeting with the biggest developer minds. I'm talking Miyamoto, Yokoi, Takeda, and Sakamoto. They're all in the meeting with Harmon. Like, how intimidating is this? This has got to be super crazy, right? And they essentially all just laugh at him, which sounds really mean and messed up.
Yeah, it's super messed up.
It is. And they said it wasn't possible for Harmon to make a great game. And then he had a great argument that he threw this out to Yamauchi. He said, okay, how much money do you, Yamauchi, spend on a really bad commercial? It's $3 million is the rough estimate he puts out there. Instead of making a bad commercial for Nintendo, give me $3 million and 1 year to make a great game. And all that happens if I fail is you just make one less horrible commercial. That was his argument.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yamauchi agrees. As long as Miyamoto advises him on the process, Harmon's dream is going to come true. He's going to make a game for Nintendo using an iconic character. So that's where we leave off with Harmon. There's a little bit in there about Al Nielsen having second thoughts about his job. It's just some foreshadowing, which I thought was good, but it really foreshadows it very hard. This whole like section we're doing, it just happens to be the Al Nielsen show, which is fine.
Yeah. Al Nielsen is the global head of marketing for Sega at this point in time. So just setting the stage for everybody so that you can be thinking about that as we make our way through these chapters.
And he's having a bad time because of travel, which is hilarious.
He hates it, which I totally get.
Tyler gets it. I was about to say that. You get that right now. And you can talk about that more later if you choose to.
Yeah.
So the end of the chapter is Bill White breaking the rules. Okay, this is what he does. He shares Star Fox art with GamePro magazine, which may not seem like a big deal, but every piece of marketing for a Nintendo game goes to Nintendo Power. That is the rule. He breaks the rule. He directly opposes the law of the land. Peter Main claims to give him permission, but Arakawa's like, no, this is disloyalty, and we're going to fire him anyway. Don't try to, like, hide it. Okay?
Dang.
So that's where chapter 44
Off with his
ends.
head.
Really crazy stuff going on, which is why it's called Crazy Like a Fox. Chapter 45 is called Unacceptable, and super short chapter. It discusses the Sega Pico, which I don't think we've really gone into that much. It's this console that's supposed to be like the edutainment thing that Kalinsky really wants to push.
Yeah, Kalinsky's really big into it. He really loves like this educational stuff for kids, and it's always a little bit of a bummer to him that Sega wasn't really able to do much with it.
Yeah, and it's also a bummer because what happens is Nakayama is in like this. I like to picture the lab from Jurassic Park. Don't know why, okay? Because they're doing video game stuff. And they have the prototype for the Pico, and he looks at it and it looks cool. And he's like, okay, how much can we sell this for? And they tell him $150 to $200. Seems reasonable, right? He smashes it against the table and destroys it because Kalinsky said it would have to sell for $100 or less. There's no way to do it. And this chapter kind of
smashed it? That seems
smashes
like a very
it.
Steve Jobs thing.
It is. It's a very Steve Jobsy thing. It's very Jobsian, if you will.
Very Jobsian indeed. Like the story of him putting somebody brought him a prototype iPod and he was like, you need to make it smaller. And they're like, it can't be made smaller. And he like drops it in the fish tank and he says like, see all those bubbles coming out of it? That's air. You can make it smaller.
Gosh, that's just a...
I don't know if that's a real story or not. I mean, it's a real story. I don't know if it's true or not.
It's a very, very Steve Jobs moment there.
Yeah.
It feels like it. We don't really get that many moments like this in...
Kalinsky seems like too nice a guy to destroy something on a table.
No, but Nakayama, though, he's going to destroy something. But my point about this chapter is it feels kind of out of nowhere. And it's so short that it makes me wonder they could have just made it attached to another chapter. You know, well, I'm not trying to get into it, but I think the whole point is that it's very important because we know this is important to Kalinsky. And it's also showing Nakayama still 100% with Kalinsky.
Yeah.
His buddy.
It's a little bit of foreshadowing for where Kalinsky goes after Sega because he runs Leapfrog for a little while, which is like that's their whole deal is to do these things.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's if that's spoilers for the book or not, but
I mean, people should be reading the book anyway. So it's not
also
a big deal.
just history. So, you know, spoilers for real life, I guess. Sorry.
Are you going to tell our audience how World War II ended, Tyler? Really? Right now?
I would never spoil hardcore history for anybody.
Chapter 46 is called Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And this is the chapter where I feel like they could have just put this on the front of it. Not a big deal. This is me bickering. But the outburst in chapter 45 is what Kalinsky is updated with at the beginning of chapter 46 by Fisher. We all remember Fisher. He's the American contact at Sega of Japan. And Kalinsky is not surprised, but now has to figure out what he's going to do because this is the same team that is making the next gen console, right? And if they didn't impress Nakayama, he is starting to have doubts about what the 32-bit console is going to be. And those are also the team that's supposed to be working with Sony. So there's a lot of nervousness going on, a lot of anxiety on this side of things for Kalinsky. But then he switches gears to talk to Doug Glenn about the Sega channel, which is Sega's new joint endeavor with Time Warner Cable, boo, which we can all boo that company, right? No one likes cable companies.
Yeah, no one likes a cable company.
To bring out a video game TV channel to the Genesis. So that's kind of in the works. We're talking about that here. The other thing that's briefly foreshadowed and in the works is we talk about what was foreshadowed last episode is we talk about that call in chapter 43 that Kalinsky has with Arthur Pober warning him about the congressional hearings. So Sega's trying to get on top of that. Like they're trying to get ahead of this violent video game crackdown that they're worried about, especially with Mortal Kombat coming out. Because this was right after Nintendo announced they're going to make all of the blood gray instead of red. So like, what do we got to do? So what they started to do is they're talking about making their own rating system at Sega because they actually called the MPAA, like the rating people for movies. And the movie people had zero interest because they thought video games as inferior to movies, which I find funny. Yeah, because the money I mean, if you're looking at the money, it's pretty crazy how much more money video games make per year than movies. But still, it's the art thing. Okay, it's the artness of it.
Yep.
After these two brief tangents, though, we go into the real meat of what's going on in this episode, and that's Kalinsky calling Doug Glenn. And Kalinsky is worried that Nakayama's tirade might be an indication of the next Sega console not doing so hot. So what he does is he asks Glenn, who's got quite the Rolodex, apparently, because remember, this is the 90s, and people have Rolodexes.
Yeah, he literally had a Rolodex.
Literal pieces of paper with phone numbers and contacts on them. And he asks him to put feelers out there for maybe finding a partner that Sega could work with in the off chance that this thing with Sony doesn't work out. So they're already kind of talking about what the next gen console could be and what we could do. And essentially, Kalinsky wants to have options. He's trying to cover his bases here, which I think is something a good leader does. He's looking at how this could go and trying to find different situations for when it plays out wrong. And he does a really good job of that there in this
Yeah, that's just a good, like, that's good leadership, is to like kind of know what you're going to do if something doesn't work out, rather than being caught like, oh, what do we do now? Like, you have a plan. It's like, okay, that didn't work out. Execute plan B, right?
Yep, he's got plans A, B, C, and D. He's going for it. So the chapter goes into a new idea at Sega, which I thought was pretty cool, and I didn't really know about. There's Sega sub-brands. Did you know about this?
You know about Sega sub-brands?
Yeah, like, before you read the book, did you know that Sega had, like, little subsidiaries inside of themselves for like different game genres?
Oh yeah, I don't know if how that reflects on the like organization of the company, but I definitely know.
Well, specifically,
like Sega Sports was like a thing, because you could get a Sega Sports Dreamcast and it was black and said Sega Sports on it.
See, okay, so that's cool. What I'm talking about. This is Sega Sports is what they're specifically talking about in the chapter, because sports games are hot. They're hot commodities. In fact, they say that MLB, they say Joe Montana football and their NHL game, they're top 2 sellers on the Genesis.
Wow.
Very important. And what they're discovering is Joe Montana, great football player, but he's kind of nearing the end of his career. And so they can't keep doing Joe Montana football. So they need to hire a new up-and-coming young star. And they choose Seattle Mariner Ken Griffey Jr. And now...
Oh, yeah, the kid.
I think we can all agree that they're doing this because Ken Griffey Jr. is dope. But also, this is definitely a, hey, look at this Nintendo move, because they're grabbing the player from Nintendo's team and trying to make a game out of it. So Kalinsky feels this is beneficial to Sega, but Ken Griffey also feels this is beneficial to him because this is leverage. Like, hey, I'm talking to Sega also about making a game. So what are you going to do? And this works like a charm. There's actually a news story that leaks, and it kind of puts the ball in Nintendo's court to be like, what are you going to do? So it's kind of a cool moment where you see them like talking and hanging out, and I think it's a pretty neat thing.
Yeah, that's cool.
And it's just another way they put pressure on Nintendo, like make Nintendo make a choice. So the chapter ends by jumping back to the ratings issue we mentioned before, and Sega's Chris Garsky, who's the VP of licensing and acquisitions, had been working on Sega's own new rating system, which had 3 levels, which I'll go over here. They had GA, which is general audiences, MA13, which is mature audiences, but it's like PG-13 is how I would look at it, right? It's PG-13.
Mm-hmm.
MA17 is adults only. And the problem is with the announcement that Peter Main from Peter Main at Nintendo, that they're going to make the blood instead of red, the color gray, which I mentioned before, which again, I don't know how much of a real fix that is. You can just pretend it's blood. But anyway, Kalinsky looked to capitalize on this, but how was he going to take advantage of Mortal Kombat if they're going to have an MA17 rating? Because the MA17 rating might make it so potential parents don't want to buy the game for their kid. So what did they do? Well, their solution came from Chris Garsky, and that was a blood code. And that's actually what they called it. The blood code would be a code a person could enter into the game that would turn the MA13 game essentially into an MA17 game, much like the arcade version was.
Wow. That's the kind, like with the ESRB, that would get the existence of that code, and you not telling the ESRB about that would get your game bumped up in rating. Like, do you remember the Oblivion? Do you remember what happened to Oblivion?
No, what happened with Oblivion?
Why that game is rated M? When that game came out, it was rated teen. Like, there are boxes with the teen rating on it for Oblivion. In the like texture files is an unused texture. It's on the disc, but it's not used anywhere in the game of like a topless woman or something like that. And because that so of course modders like found it and they're like, oh, they've made mods, they like put it in the game, whatever. So because of that, because the file is on the disc, the ESRB was like, well, that's an M-rated game now, and they sent out stickers to like all of the retailers to like stick over the teen. I wish I had bought a copy with a sticker on it, because that would have been a cool like thing to have now, like a cool little piece of, I don't know what you'd call it, but
gaming history, I think.
Yeah, it would be cool, or even better, having a teen-rated version of it, like from the first run of it. Yeah, and even after that, they removed the file from the disc, but the ESRB was like, nah, sorry,
still mature, can't go, no take backsies. They
did that with the same thing with Grand Theft Auto San Andreas 2, when the like mini game was found that you could get to with an explicit mini game that was not finished. It was in the code, but it was like clearly an unfinished thing that they didn't end up using in the final game, but you could get to it with like an action replay or something. Or if you're on PC, you could just mod it back in. And they sent out adults only stickers for San Andreas, but they didn't make it stay adults only once they like made versions of the game without it in it.
So I think what we're hearing here is the ESRB has got something against Bethesda. They're going after Bethesda. That's what I've heard.
Yeah, you're probably right. You could probably make the argument that Oblivion should have been M-rated anyway, but
yeah, I mean, it gets pretty bloody. You're just murdering people with swords.
Yeah.
So this is a good topic, by the way. I feel like games that came out as a certain rating and were changed for some reason is I don't know. I mean, there's got to be a more glamorous way to say that, but that seems like a fun topic to talk about. Okay. Chapter 47, The Man Who Came from Pepsi. Now, I'm going to start off by saying something that I feel like I say every episode in this book series, and that this chapter is my favorite chapter. And I like how it really goes into the similarities between Sega versus Nintendo of the 1990s and the Pepsi versus Coke of the 1980s. With that said, we are going to be brushing over almost all of the Pepsi versus Coke stuff because that's for our other podcast, Sodex, History of Sodas.
There's some really good, like if you're into these kinds of like corporate rivalries, Pepsi versus Coke in the 80s is like some real prime stuff. I say that I just went to the Coke Museum? Yeah, the Coke Museum in Atlanta, Georgia. And it was pretty cool. Obviously, it's very, very Coke slanted. They don't even mention Pepsi anywhere, I don't think. But yeah, they do talk about New Coke there a little bit. There's like a small little thing about New Coke, which I think you're going to talk about in a second. But
yeah, I'll talk about that to people that don't know what that is. But yeah, it's very interesting stuff. So this starts out with Nintendo hiring George Harrison, and it's not the Beatle. It confused me at first. I thought they were straight up talking about George Harrison because it opens up to George Harrison and Shigeru Miyamoto watching the Super Mario Brothers movie. And I'm like, was George Harrison a fan of Super Mario Brothers? I had no idea, but it's not him. So George Harrison is actually the former marketing guru at Pepsi. And this is important because, as I said before, Pepsi versus Coke and Sega versus Nintendo, a lot of similarities. And with Harrison being on the side of Pepsi, it's like Nintendo now has an inside scoop into what Sega might be doing. They kind of can get in the mindset of Sega. And Harrison was there at Pepsi when they became the, quote, choice of the next generation, like that campaign where they were appealing to youth.
Yeah, they were the Sega of their time.
Remember the Pepsi challenge?
Yeah.
A blind taste test between Pepsi and Coke and which one you thought tasted better. And then also, as Tyler previously mentioned, the horrible New Coke debacle of 1985. If you don't know about the New Coke thing, TLDR, Coke made a new formula to compete with Pepsi, and they got so much backlash for not getting rid of the old Coke recipe that actually only lasted 3 months. And the Coke executives had to admit they were wrong and go back. And that's also why Coke sometimes has Coca-Cola Classic written on it. I don't know if they really do that anymore. They used to put Coca-Cola Classic. That was right after New Coke to like make people know for sure, like, no, this is the old Coke formula.
This is the old Coke, yeah. Ironically, that marketing thing really worked out for them. Once they changed it back, they sold so much Coke Classic, like way more Coke than they were selling before that. It ended up being a really positive thing for them, which has like conspiracy theorists thinking they did it on purpose. And there's a famous quote where somebody at Coke like says like, "Oh, some people think we did this on purpose," and to them I say, "We're not that smart and we're not that dumb."
But yeah, that's really funny.
I think it's pretty funny. Yeah, I wish that they would bring it back sometimes, like as a novelty. Be like, "Hey, new Coke," you know, they could do that now in like sort of ironic novelty. I would try it.
I would too. I never got to try it. That was before my time, literal my foreign time. I was not born yet, so I would let try it. Back to Harrison and Nintendo. Harrison was really hired because he wasn't reactionary. He was the kind of person who would pick their battles. And after Bill White leaking documents to other magazines that were only meant for Nintendo Power, Harrison was the man for his new job. Like, he was the guy that was like, you go by the book, you don't think brashly, you pick your battles, you're the guy, you're Nintendo. That's what Nintendo wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're dropped in at the beginning of chapter 47, and it's Miyamoto and Harrison watching a screening of the Mario Brothers movie with Bob Hoskins and Jacques Leguizamo, right? And Miyamoto is very reserved and complimentary, even though everyone knows the movie is bad. It is a bad movie. Harrison flies back to report to Arakawa and says, yeah, the movie is bad. But the good news is it is so bad that it will leave theaters so fast. There is no reason to spend money to make it so it doesn't see the light of day, because Nintendo's paying the distribution rights, so they could not distribute it and just stop it in its tracks. But they're like, it's not worth the money or the loss. Just let it come out, let it be bad, and just move on. And this is a prime example of picking your battles. This is the kind of thing that someone does when they're like, this is not a big deal. It's not something to freak out about. Let it come out, move on. This is the new Nintendo way. There is one common person in this chapter, though, and that is Michael Jackson, the pop singer, because Michael Jackson was brought on to be the spokesperson of Pepsi by Harrison and is now being targeted by Sega to do the soundtrack for Sonic 3. And there's one problem with this, though, and that is the game will not be done in time. So there is a solution, and that is that Paul Rue, and if you remember Paul Rue, he saw a device that let you add content onto a game, much like a Game Genie. It essentially is a Game Genie. You plug the cartridge into the Genie device and you put it into your system, and that is their solution. So Yuji Naka can still work on adding Knuckles to Sonic 3, but the first half of the game without Knuckles can be released in February of 1994. So that means that Sega will be releasing technically 3 Sonic games. Sonic 3 Parts 1 and 2, and then a Sonic pinball game. So 1994, big year for our little friend, the Blue Hedgehog.
It was a pretty good year to be a Sonic fan. And those are all good games, too. Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles, which is just Sonic 3 Part 2. Both great games. Sonic Pinball is really fun, too.
Yeah, Sonic Pinball is fun. So now you think, oh, this chapter, they got so many solutions to problems. Everyone's happy on all sides, right? Nope. And the big reveal happens. And that reveal that is going to transform gaming and push it into the modern age is Olaf Olafsson from Sony calls Tom Kalinske and tells him, hey, the Sony-Sega deal has fallen apart. There's creative differences. It's just not going to work out. Sony and Sega will not be partnering to make the next generation console. We got to find another plan. And both men are bummed. And you can tell they really wanted to make this work, though. But now, more importantly, the realization hits that they're going to be competitors. Sony and Sega are going to be fighting because Sony is working on their new console. Sega's working on their new console. Nintendo's working on their new console. The big question is there enough room in this industry for 3 game consoles? Well, yes, we know that's true. It's possible. But did they know that in 1994? Probably not. They had no idea. So it leaves this kind of open-ended thing. I think they call it like, is there 3 horses in this race without sending one of them to the glue factory? Is what Blake J. Harris writes, which is pretty dark, but I liked it. I thought it was funny.
Wow.
That's where we end it at this chapter with, it's official. Sega and Sony are parting ways, and Sony is going to start making the PlayStation.
Oof. Wow. In the arms of the angel. So Sony has now parted ways with both Nintendo and Sega to make a console. So it was always destiny for them to have to do it on their own because They weren't going to be able to partner with anybody.
They can't partner with anyone. It's a solo act only.
It's a solo act, which is where we go into chapter 48, which is called March of the Lemmings. And we start this chapter. This chapter is very important for this Sony arc, because now that Sony has struck out on their own, they need games. Because as we all know, if you ain't got no games, your console is not going to be successful. So the chapter starts talking about Lemmings. Not the game, though we will get to that, but the urban legend that lemmings, which are a real animal, by the way, they throw themselves off of a cliff to their deaths to combat overpopulation. This was made popular by a Disney documentary in the 50s, but that is not true. Lemmings don't do that. But they do follow each other like very well. Like there's a leader, and like they. So I guess the idea is that if the leader goes over a cliff, the lemmings would follow. It's like sort of the extrapolation that Disney made. But in the documentary, they just threw them off the cliff by hand, which is super.
Yeah, it's one of the most like messed up things from film. I think is they just killed them. They flew them in from Canada and then killed them. It's really terrible.
And this was the 50s, so times were different, and that doesn't make it okay. And that's wild. So that's another lie that big Disney wants us to believe. But more important than the animal lemmings is the video game lemmings, published by a company called Psygnosis. I think that's how you say it, Psygnosis. Does that sound right?
I said cynosis, but because I thought the G in the end was like a sound, but I don't know.
You might be right. Cynosis. Yeah, I might be. I'm going to go with cynosis. Okay, cynosis. The game was developed by DMA Designs, though, which is a company that would eventually call itself Rockstar. So that's a little bit of trivia for you. It was very popular on the Amiga, and Olaf Olafsson from Sony wanted some of that action for Sony's upcoming console. Sony knew they had the hardware chops to make something great, but as we all know, and like I said earlier, you gotta have games. Your console's gonna be bad. So Psygnosis was a publisher that Olafsson thought was like an early stage EA. There were a lot of similarities between EA and Psygnosis, though EA had moved from primarily PC games to console. But Psygnosis had stayed with the PC, specifically the Amiga, but they branched out and they were on other platforms as well. Because we all know how the Amiga turned out.
Yeesh.
Great systems did not last, did not stand the test of time. They are in the graveyard of computer brands. Rest in peace. Here we get like a nice little history lesson on the US versus the UK video game industries in the 80s, which is TLDR of that is basically once the video game crash hits in like 1982, 1983, the two countries go in different directions. The UK goes all in on computers because those you could buy them and use them for things other than games, and then people ended up playing games on them anyway. And the US, though, got a little thing called Nintendo, and we all know how that turned out. So Nintendo wouldn't make it over to the UK for quite a while. But I've noticed this. If you read like retro gaming magazines, like Retro Gamer, that's an actual gaming magazine called Retro Gamer. It's very good. And probably relevant to your interests if you like this podcast. That magazine is based in the UK, so a lot of the writers are people who grew up in the UK during the 80s, and they often wax nostalgic about their ZX Spectrums and their Amigas and their Commodores because that was what was big in the UK because they didn't get Nintendo. Nintendo of Europe wasn't even a thing until 1990, so those folks really missed out on like all of the Nintendo stuff that was happening in the 80s, which I think is actually really interesting. So, because like the UK and the US are pretty similar culturally speaking, but then there are those differences like, well, no NES in the UK until 1990, so they missed this whole wave of console stuff, and thus their video game industry goes off in a different direction. I think is very interesting.
I love this part. I also thought it was interesting that they're the first to have the PC versus console debate because of this.
Yeah, because in the US, it was like, it wasn't even a debate. Nobody was playing games on their PC. It was just Sony versus, or Sega versus Nintendo. It was like, nobody even talks about PC because we're all playing on console. Now, what console are you playing on, right? That's pretty interesting, I think.
I love it.
Me too. And that's why Psygnosis stuck with PCs, was because they were in the UK and that's where the money was. So, in the US, EA switched to consoles because that's where the money was. So I think it would be cool to do an episode on the computers of the 80s. Have we done that? We've done so many episodes now. I can't even
We haven't done that, and that sounds like something that'd be really fun to research and look at, because you can also emulate a lot of those 80s computers on a PC, and so we could like play with them and stuff too, which I think would be fun.
Yeah. So Sony was looking at Psygnosis, thinking maybe they want to buy them because they made great games and Sony needed games. They needed any games at all because Sony didn't have any. And they figured they were already ahead because PCs were ahead of the curve, and Sony wanted to be the first out there with this like next-gen console that could compete on a hardware level with PCs. And so they were like, well, Psygnosis is ahead of the game by making games for PC. They'll know how to make great games for a console that is on that level, right? And so, like lemmings, Olaf Olafsson thought that the industry would follow the leader here, and he thought Psygnosis would be the leader, which is a really nice bookend for the chapter, Blake J. Harris. It's masterful writing, and I really appreciated it. I also really like the forward-thinking decision-making that Olaf Olafsson had here. Obviously, Psygnosis didn't quite go on to become like as big a deal as EA, but I think it's easy to see how they might have thought that it would. I don't know what like specifically happened here that kept the dream from happening, but I think at the time it was probably a good decision, knowing what they knew at the time. You know, sometimes a decision doesn't work out, but that doesn't mean that you made the wrong decision based on the data that you had. And I don't think Olafsson made the wrong decision based on the data that he had. Obviously, I'm sure he wishes he made a different decision, but based on the information you got, I think that was a good decision. So
yeah, you got to go with what you got.
That's right. You can't look back on the past and say, well, if I had known something else, because you didn't. So, tough luck. So that's chapter 48. Chapter 49, though, is called Switching Sides, and it's about Bill White, which is the guy who switched over from Nintendo to Sega. And he claims there's no story here. He just felt like making a change. But everyone thought, they're like, why? Why did you change? What happened? What's going on over there? And the book kind of describes this as a scene where like Sega is having like fancy dinner with retailers, and all the retailers are like, why would you switch on us, Bill, over to Sega? I kind of question, this seems like a scene that was just like made to sort of sell this idea that like probably didn't actually happen. But I don't question the accuracy of the part of the story where he unbuttons his pants and moons the direction of Nintendo's office, because mooning somebody in the 90s was serious, and he didn't just do it on a whim if he didn't mean it,
100%.
It was a big deal, and he did that. It's like calling someone a butthead. Remember being called a butthead in the 90s?
I still remember it. I never forgot.
I know. It was bad. I can't tell if it was just because like, when you're a kid, being called a butthead hurts worse, or if it was like a bigger insult in the 90s. Sometimes I can't tell the difference. But he did that. The reason he did that was to prove that he wasn't a spy, because obviously a spy would never do that.
100%. It's like that show, isn't Sons of Anarchy, where the guy goes undercover with the motorcycle gang? Is that it? This is his version. Mooning Nintendo was his version of being in a motorcycle gang and committing crimes.
Yeah, I think you're right. The other part to this story is that Nintendo stole the rights to your boy Ken Griffey Jr. right out from under Sega. It was probably a lot easier for them because they own the Mariners.
And Ken Griffey Jr. probably got a really sweet deal, right? Because he did the leverage thing. In the end, Ken Griffey Jr. was well off, and I think that's what's most important for all of us.
Yeah. He goes to Nintendo and he goes, hey, these guys over at Sega, they want me to be on their game. And Nintendo was like, we can't have that. Plus, we're making a baseball game. What's his name? Is making a baseball game. We told him to make a baseball game. You're in our baseball game. Now here's like a fat stack of money because we have more money than Sega. And you're right. Ken Griffey Jr. is the winner here.
Because they had that war chest, that famed Nintendo war chest that we've heard about so many times.
Yeah.
It's like the Disney Vault. Nintendo's war chest and the Disney Vault. Those two things.
Another person being asked to not necessarily switch sides, but sort of leave the game here is Al Nielsen. Remember, we got some foreshadowing earlier. He's not really liking his job. He doesn't really like all the travel that he's got to do. He thought he was going to like this travel, but it turns out he doesn't like it. And he feels like he doesn't have that much influence. Like, he goes to these meetings, he says some ideas, and people are like, yeah, that's a great idea. And then, like, because of, the way business works, bureaucracy and stuff, like, nothing really happens. And he feels like he's just, like, running himself ragged, flying all around the world for no gain. And this is illustrated in a story where I think that maybe I'm jumping ahead here. I'm jumping ahead. I'll tell the story. The story in a second.
You know what this reminded me of, though? With the whole, like, you go into a meeting, you say something, and you leave. It reminded me how in like high school, you would have that group of people come and do an assembly about something, And everyone would be like, rah, rah, we're going to change, rah, rah, rah. And then they'd leave and nothing would change. It's exactly that. That was entirely Al Nielsen's job, was to go rah, rah, rah. No one listened to him, and then he'd just move on to the next city until he came back and he'd be like, nothing happened. What happened?
Yeah.
I was here last year. What's going on?
He's like, I am destroying myself flying around the world for nothing. And he's pretty upset about it. And he complains to Tom Kalinske about it, which takes us to chapter 50, which is called The Tipping Point. And right now it's time for Summer CES in 1993, which is basically E3 before E3. And the biggest game this year is Mortal Kombat, the game that famously came out on both Sega and Nintendo with the blood code you were mentioning earlier, Mike.
That blood
Sega,
code.
at least. Yeah. And it's also one that lawmakers in Washington, D.C. took aim at specifically for its gory violence and probably the blood code specifically. In fact, Emil Heidkamp from Konami told some other folks from Konami that if they were going to make a game like Mortal Kombat, he'd have to call it, he'd have to leave. Because that's where he drew the line. He wasn't like mad about it. He wasn't like upset. He's just like, I don't want to make those kind of games. And, I get it. Where do you draw the line on things you aren't comfortable with when it comes to creative work like that? Do you like suck it up for just one game? Or do you just say, you know what? If that's the direction you're headed, cool. See you later. Thanks for all the fish. Which is a really tough decision because you don't know if it's like, well, maybe you can just get over a speed bump here, or maybe this is like indicative of the direction you're going to be going, and you should just get out if that's not the direction you want to go. I do not envy folks who have to make a choice like that. So I guess Mortal Kombat was Heidkamp's line in the sand. And if Konami wanted to make those kinds of games, he was out.
He was like, nope. See ya.
I do not like to make fighting games with the bloods in them. And we said no. So we go back to Al Nielsen, and an unnamed Japanese company requested that he fly out to be present for a meeting because, Zoom didn't exist yet. So he flew in from somewhere, and in the book, it's like, Brazil, Argentina, we don't know. No one really knows. The point, it doesn't matter where he's from, and also he couldn't tell you because he was traveling so much at the time that it was all a blur, right? So he wanted to meet with this company that wanted to get into video games, or they wanted him to meet with them. So he flies all the way to Japan after being somewhere else. And he the book makes a big deal of him, getting on the plane, sitting on the plane, get off the plane, get your bags, go to get in the cab, ride in the cab, you go to the thing, show your ID, they take you upstairs, you sit down, you wait. And then the meeting was canceled. They just came out and they're just like, oh, that meeting's canceled. He waited there for a long time, oh, the meeting's canceled. And in the days before Zoom, this is insane to me in these days where you could just fly across the world, wait for a meeting, and find out it's been canceled. Oh, darn it, we'll reschedule. Are you kidding me? He probably flew 12 hours or more to get to Tokyo. And they're just like, nah, we don't need you. And now what? He's got to fly back to wherever he was? Ugh.
Yeah, I would be so mad. Man. So mad. That's a phone call, my friend. You have phones. Just do phones.
That's right. That's it's sort of like in Batman. I think it's in The Dark Knight when he flies to Hong Kong to tell the company that's making a bunch of stuff for him that they're canceling the deal or something. Because they're making a lot of war things or something. And he's like, I wanted to fly in here to do it in person. And the guy's like, I think, Mr. Wayne, a simple phone call would have sufficed.
I love that.
Yeah. So Nielsen was also concerned about what was going on at Sega of America. They didn't seem like they were able to focus on anything. And then, of course, there's all this tension between Sega of America and Sega of Japan, which is just sort of an overarching thing that just hangs over this entire book and a big reason why things fall apart eventually for Sega. Spoilers on history again. Which is, God, that meeting getting canceled, I'm it happened 30 years ago, and I'm I feel it right now.
You feel that so hard. I mean, I've flown or driven to places the show gets canceled, and you're just like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I flew all the way out here. I remember it was my side tangent time. It was my 30th birthday. I was performing at a comedy club that is closing, so I can say the name, the Looney Bin in Oklahoma City, and it was the day of my birthday, and I had to fly in early to get there on a Wednesday to do the whole weekend, and they canceled the Wednesday show. And I was like, why did I fly in a day early on my 30th birthday? Why did I do this? And I was so
your
upset.
30th birthday was a waste of
And I
flight.
went back to the comedy condo and watched the Andre the Giant documentary on HBO that had just come out. And that was my 30th birthday, everybody.
Okay. Dang, man.
It happens though. For this, I mean, that was me flying to Oklahoma City. That's like a 4-hour flight. This is over 12 hours to fly to Japan and just wait and sit and wait and sit. I feel for Al Nielsen 100%.
Yeah, I'd probably just quit. I'd be like, I can't, I'm out of here. I'm going home. Bye.
Yeah, me too.
So yeah, I love how this chapter is written too, because it's really, it's written in a way that sort of drags the travel out a lot, because that's what it feels like for him, is just like, ugh, here we go again. It's doing all the same stuff, you know, never getting a chance to like take a break because he's always flying somewhere. Even when he's at home, he's going to have to fly out again soon, which is just, I feel for him. So, and he doesn't like, he thought he was going to like travel, but he doesn't. And so he tells Tom Kalinske that he's not happy, and he's considering an offer that Viacom gave him. Because Viacom is like, do you want to be, they gave him a couple of different options that I think are not really that important what they are, but it was no travel. It was in New York, which is like not great for him. He doesn't love New York, but it was like no travel. Sign me up. And so he talks to Tom Kalinske and he's like, hey, Viacom wants me to do this. Like, and he feels like he's like not really gonna stick around at Sega. And Tom's like, no, we can make this work. Well, tell me what we can do to fix this. And they'll like try a little bit longer. But kind of eventually, he's gonna leave Sega. Spoilers for the next chapter, I guess. But Kalinske, though, he's feeling great because Sega is starting to overtake Nintendo. It is a little bummer that things fell apart with Sony over the hardware. And this is mostly because Sony, or Ken Kutaragi, he wanted to focus solely on 3D capabilities. But Sega was like, nah, we'd rather like focus on 2D power. And while Kalinske agreed with Kutaragi, he couldn't convince his folks at Sega that 3D was better than 2D. And they were like, nah, 3D is too much work. The games won't get, like, it's just too much. No game maker's going to want to make anything in 3D. 2D is the way to go. But since he wasn't an engineer, he didn't listen to his own gut, and they were telling him, they're like, you don't get it. You're not an engineer. You don't make games. You don't know how this works. And so he just trusted his people. And that's like a time where he probably should have went with his gut. Cause they knew the Saturn wasn't good. When they saw the Saturn, they were like, this is not good, for making games on. So Kalinske wanted to find a partner to help with hardware, and they turned to SGI, Silicon Graphics Interactive, I want to say.
I think that's right.
Stands for. And they just wowed them with their demos. So if you know the history of this thing, you know what happened with that SGI technology. But if you're not, we'll keep this a little bit spoiler free. But I would say Sega's interactions with SGI are one of their 90s goofs that would eventually contribute to their downfall. But we'll get there at a later time. This chapter ends by talking about Rare, which is a company we've done an episode on in the past, so y'all know what's up there. They hadn't really made any games for a while between the NES and the Super Nintendo, so what could they possibly be cooking up? Remember, this is 1993, so what could Rare be working on here? If they're not making nothing, right? Oh boy, that's like some foreshadowing. So,
that's really good foreshadowing. I like your foreshadowing voice.
Hey, thanks. I just feel for Al Nielsen. This is a chapter that just made me be like, yeah, dude, I get it.
Yeah, man. It's not easy. Traveling's my least favorite part of stand-up comedy, I have to say.
Yeah,
it is a hot bummer to be in airports all the time and hotels all the time.
Yeah, and you would think that, like for me, because I've been traveling a lot this past month, I was like, oh, this will be cool. I'll play a lot of games on the plane, or I'll play a lot of games in the hotel. Like I will have these like time to play Switch or Steam Deck or whatever. And what I found was like when I'm on the plane, I just don't want to. I'm just like, I don't.
Your brain like turns to mush. It's a weird plane thing. That happens to me too. Like I can't sleep, but I want to sleep, and you just sit there and you just zone out, and it's so weird.
That's exactly it. Like I can't sleep on planes, but I get very tired on planes. So I just sort of sit there and like listen to podcasts or listen to music or whatever, and like that's kind of it. And I just sort of stare. Ugh, I don't like it. But now we're on the last chapter of the section before we get to part 5 of this book. This is a quick chapter. It's called The Last and Best of Peter Pans. So spoiler alert, rescinded. Al Nielsen left Sega. Womp womp. They couldn't solve the problems. They tried to. Like, Kalinske really wanted to keep Al around. It wasn't because Kalinske didn't want to do what he needed to do to keep him around. I think it was just one of those things where it's just like, you know what? It's time, man. I got to go. And Viacom offered him such a great opportunity. So it's just a really nice scene of Al saying goodbye to everyone. And this is, I think, a sort of, it's a nice scene for Al, but I think it's also like a harbinger of Sega in general, because everybody's sort of saying goodbye and the magic is gone. Like, that's kind of why Al left. It's just like, it's time. The magic is gone. We've sort of done what we set out to do here a little bit, and now we're going to be heading into like this new era, and I don't want to be part of it because it's just different now. And things just weren't the same as they were in like the late 80s and the early 90s. His job is different, the industry's different, the world is different. It feels just, it's time, you know? And he wasn't the only one who felt that way either. So this is kind of like maybe a little bit more foreshadowing of like what's going to happen here to Sega.
I have a discussion question.
Okay.
Goodbye, Al Nielsen, first of all. But my discussion question is this. Do you think there's a case to be made, because he was a gamer and because he was so passionate about it? I mean, it's not a long shot, but I think Al Nielsen is the heart of Sega. And this is like, he's leaving, right?
Yeah, I think you might be right. I think, yeah, he's leaving because he just can't. It's just different now, you know, and it's just time to move on to something else, and that's probably why he leaves the video game industry altogether to go work at Viacom, and work on their brands, because that's like a totally different sort of industry, entertainment. They own like Nickelodeon and a bunch of stuff, but MTV, I guess, at this point too, and like it's time to just move on to another point in his life. Like, that's it, you know?
Yeah, it gets kind of heavy, but I think everyone has that point happen in their life. You know, like, you always are like having fun in high school, and you're like, oh man, I'm using high school because like I feel like most people listening to this podcast are going or have been to high school before. Mm-hmm. You get to the end of it and you're like, oh, it's time. You know, like, I've been here 4 years. It's time to go.
Yeah. It's over. It's we're out of here.
College is the same way. You know, you go through jobs in your life, like, this is it. This is done. I gotta move on. And Al Nielsen found it, which is good. But I'm gonna say this is the last straw for Sega to be like, oh, things are changing, and not in a good way. Yeah. Oof. It's a heavy ending. I like it, though.
It is. Me too. But we can bring it back a little bit. What you been playing, Mike?
Ooh-wee. So I have been playing a lot more New World than I expected.
I hear that's made a lot of changes.
The fresh start servers came out, and I started a third character, and I've been playing that one. And so they level up faster, which is fun. But I'm really enjoying it. I'm liking the whole just follow along the storyline thing. And I haven't forgotten Witcher 3. I have been playing Witcher 3 as well. I'm kind of trying to balance the two right now. And Skellige is a great area, and I love it so much. But I want to savor it. And I also am realizing The Witcher 3 will always be here. The excited members of people playing in New World will not always be here. So I'm definitely like leaning more on New World than on Witcher 3, because if we know one thing about MMOs, all right, Amazon, you got a bunch of people back into your game. Now, how are you going to hold them there? And that is the big experiment. Right. And you
don't want to play after everybody leaves again.
Yeah, it was crazy. I remember we started playing, our mutual friend of ours, we started playing together, and we were in a group finder, and it took like 10 minutes to find a group. I did the group finder for the same dungeon last night, and it was instant. Like, it's just amazing how many people are there. You're all swarming the areas together, which is fun. They added this like Guitar Hero-esque bard game that you like play a song and you can tip the person and you get a buff for tipping them. Like, increases your gathering speed or makes you more dexterous or your strength or whatever. And it's fun because you have guys on voice chat making up their own lyrics to the songs they're playing, which is very funny. And you also, I mean, they're never appropriate, but you also have people like coming up to them playing a different instrument and being like, "Can I join your band?" And this is all just happening in towns. It's the beautiful thing of like MMO ridiculousness that was probably there in like early World of Warcraft and stuff. That's kind of gone now. It's
definitely there in Final Fantasy 14. You see people playing in the streets because you can, like, I think the bard job can like play custom songs or something. And
I love that. I think it's so fun. Yeah. And it's straight up like, if you play the instrument in New World, it's Guitar Hero. It's just Guitar Hero on your computer, which is cool. So I've been playing some of that. Witcher 3. I picked up on a whim, I saw Zoo Tycoon and I'm like, hey, you know what? I played a lot of Jurassic World. That's made by Frontier, right? The same company. I'll pick up Zoo Tycoon. I can't do it. I can't get into it. I can just feel it. I can just feel it's like pull sucking me in. And I'm like, I can't do it. So I turned it off. I played like 10 minutes of it and I was like, nope, this is a big nope. Otherwise I'm going to fall into it and I can't do that right now. So that's where I'm at. What have you been playing?
Well, I've been traveling a lot, so I used, like I said, I thought I would use this time to play tons of games. Turns out I just get sleepy on planes. But I have played a couple hours of Mario and Rabbids Sparks of Hope, which is very fun. I like the changes they've made to the formula. It's still basically the same game. There's some quality of life stuff during the battles. It's a tactical RPG for those who don't know about the Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle series. It's a tactical RPG. It's still, of course, everything takes place on a grid in each battle, but it just feels a little bit more fluid. There's some like sort of changes that they've made, not so much to the actual gameplay or like the actual strategy, but more, at least as far as I am in there, but just more of like making it feel better. The worlds, like the overworld, is much more cool and detailed, and I feel like in the first game, the battles would sort of be in the overworld, like you would sort of move through like a linear overworld, right? And like you just get to the battle, and like once you were done with the battle, you'd sort of be spit out on the other side, right? Now it works more like a JRPG where you like see an enemy on the field and you run into them, and then now it's you play the thing. They aren't random encounters though. They're not just like they're definitely like each encounter is planned out by the developer, by Ubisoft that made it. So like each level has its own, like they're all a puzzle, right? It's all a tactical RPG puzzle, which I really love. And I think it's a great way to do like an RPG system, like to have sort of that feeling of random battles, but make every battle matter too. I wish more JRPGs would do that because, you know, it just gets down to grinding where you just spam attack over and over again, right? That's not how it is in Mario Rabbids because every encounter is important and every encounter is different. And you can lose any encounter. I'm playing on the hard mode. I will probably set it down when I get stuck on some boss at some point. But playing on the hard mode has been really fun and it's made me redo encounters over because like if you get to the end of the encounter, you took a lot of damage, you could restart it and like, because you don't heal after the battle on hard mode. So you restart it and like try to do it, but have more health at the end, which I think is fun. And like, it's fun to redo a thing and try to do it better because your reward is that you get to hang on to more of your health.
That is cool. I love that first game, and you were the one that showed me that, so I'm definitely down to pick this one up. I'm so excited for Pokemon, though. I can't.
Me too. Man. I am actually excited for
that. And that's really soon, right?
I think it's next week.
Next week, yeah. I haven't
this
pre-ordered
week, I guess,
anything.
when you listen to it.
Yeah, I haven't pre-ordered anything yet, so I'm wondering if I should just get it. If they'll have enough copies the day of, they have to.
They always do.
Which one are you getting? I was going to get Violet because a person I know is getting Scarlet.
Oh, I was also thinking about getting Violet because Vi is my favorite.
Well, we can still trade because we're friends, so it's fine. Okay. And I'll get you stuff from the other guy. You know, be like, hey, Tyler, we'll have an illegal underground Pokemon smuggling ring. That's what we'll do.
Perfect. Love it.
Well, we don't have enough time to do emails today, unfortunately, but we do have some in the can. So if I emailed you about it, you know it's going to happen. I swear. Great questions. But for now, if you want to email us, you can send us an email at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can join our Discord by either emailing us or going to my Twitter profile, clicking at the pinned tweet at the top of my profile, which is @mecoletta. That's an invite that never expires. Tyler's on Twitter @SneakerElf, ELPH. I think that's it. I think we did it. Next week, more console wars. Tyler, do you want to say bye to anybody before we go?
Bye, anybody.